Metal Gear Solid has always been one of my favorite games growing up. I specifically remember the hours and hours of narrations within the game, and I always remember thinking, this is so complex and well researched. I never even thought to question the science behind the game. Well, few years later, more like a decade later, a couple of degrees and some work experience here and there, and now I think I finally have somewhat of a skill set to analyze some of the information in Metal Gear Solid. Now, given that my degrees are biology related, that's pretty much all I'm able to analyze, so hence this video. One of the mistakes that the developers did towards the end of this video is gonna shock you in how rudimentary it is. I'm still surprised no biologist has even caught this mistake. I'll definitely be going over it towards the end of this video, and it surprised me. Really. I was questioning how on earth could this mistake even slide. Without further ado, my qualifications are a bachelor's in biochemistry, a master's in biology. I have about a year and a half working in the labs in the biotech industry and about 2 years in the tech industry as a biology researcher. So hopefully I'm qualified to make this video. And without further ado, let's get right into this video. So I'm not gonna have the time to go through every single Metal Gear Solid game in the entire franchise, but I'm gonna start with Metal Gear Solid 1 for this video. I know there are other Metal Gears that came out before Metal Gear Solid 1 for the PS1, but I am so sorry, I'm just not interested. Sorry. And if you want any of the information that shows up on the screen or any of the information I talked about, it's definitely going to be linked down below in the description for you to check out. So we start off the game with Snake being on a mission to save 2 hostages and to investigate a possible nuclear war threat. We're introduced to the concept of the Foxhound members, Sniper Wolf, Psycho Mantis, Liquid Snake, all of them being mentioned. And that's pretty much it. Next thing we're gonna see here is how the codec system works.
The codec's receiver directly stimulates the small bones of your ear. No one but you will be able to hear it.
So this first biology fact, true. All sound waves are vibrations traveling through air. They reach the eardrum, which also vibrates. It transmits that vibration to the 3 middle bone ears, which then later transmit the vibration to the fluid inside our ears. It's picked up by the hair cells in our ears and it's transmitted into our brain. Can this technology be invented? Sure. Would it be invented? I don't know, because when Snake talks, he's making noise. So it's interesting, but I don't see the need for it unless you're just receiving information, not really outputting information. Next, Snake is talking to Naomi on the codec about Alaska's harsh weather and how he's able to survive through it.
If it weren't for your suit and your shot, I would have turned into a popsicle out there.
An anti-freezing peptide, Snake. All of the Genome soldiers in this exercise are using it.
So about the super suit that he's wearing, or the sneaking suit he calls it, I think that's more of a physics question. I'm not sure how they would engineer such a thing, but there are such a things in biology as anti-freezing peptides. They're mainly found in the Arctic species, specifically in fish, amphibians, the plants, and the insects. And yeah, they are naturally occurring in nature to help these species survive the harshest of winters. What these anti-freezing peptides do is that they lower the freezing temperature of water within the cells so that this reduces the possibility of cell membrane damage. However, as you would expect, there's no actual research on these anti-freezing peptides being used on primates, at least not that I know of as of now. Mainly, they're being researched as a lab tool to help with cryopreservation, which is a fancy word for just freezing things at very, very low temperatures. Typically, we do that for cells in order to keep using them over and over. Research has shown that cells treated with the anti-freezing peptides help with their viability, and more interestingly, there's research from Yale that shows that these anti-freezing peptides have reduced frostbite in the mouse skin as well as the mouse tail when it was injected in both the cells and the live mice. But I'm not really surprised that frostbite isn't really on Big Pharma's worry list right now, hence why I doubt there's a lot of funding for stuff like this. In this next scene, Snake is introduced to Mei Ling, which is the data analyst or the intel specialist.
I just didn't expect a world-class designer of military technology to be so cute.
You're just flattering me.
Now, the biology here that I'm trying to study is nothing. It's just a cute scene. But also, I have a question. How can Snake know Mei Ling is cute if he can only hear her voice? Does he mean her voice is cute? Because they can only hear each other. There's no pictures or visuals. Mei Ling now shows Snake how to use the map in the upper right corner, and she also starts talking about the Genome soldiers.
The Genome soldiers have highly developed senses of hearing and vision due to their gene therapy.
So theoretically speaking, I guess you could take a sample size of people who have the best vision and the best hearing in the world. Not really sure how you would do that, but I know the Turkish Olympian would definitely be on there. Anyway, you could take a sample size of that and just do DNA sequencing specifically for the vision and the hearing genes, and then use some sort of bioinformatics algorithm to extract the most optimal sequence, and then kind of edit genes that way. So I guess you could do that for soldiers. Hasn't obviously been done, but the science is technically there. And moving on, in the Codec, they're talking about how Snake is pretty much naked in that he only has his binoculars, and if he wants weapons, he has to go out and scavenge for them.
I remember. First, I'm strip searched by Dr. Naomi here, and then all my weapons are taken away. Imagine yourself put in that position.
Well, if you make it back in one piece, maybe I'll let you do a strip search on me.
I'll hold you to that, Doctor. By the way, sorry to disappoint you, but I did manage to smuggle out my smokes.
How did you do that?
In my stomach, thanks to the shot you gave me that suppressed my stomach acids.
Cigarettes? How are those going to help you?
You never know.
So for this part, I'm not going to be using any fancy science terms at all. Let's follow this logic, right? Snake swallows some cigarettes. Let's assume these shots are so potent that the gastric juices are basically like water, like the pH of water, which has its own concerns, but let's just assume that, right? Sure, the tobacco and the cigarette butts may survive that environment, but the paper that wraps the cigarette, I mean, that stuff falls apart with regular water, again, with a pH of 7, let alone the gastric juices and the enzymes in the stomach. But again, if you mess with the pH for that much, that'll just ruin your enzymes anyway. It's a whole thing. Regardless, this is a complete no-go for me. This is not really viable in any scenario. And I really don't want to know which end Snake received those cigarettes from. Either way, it's painful. And moving throughout the game, eventually you reach a place where both the hostages that you talked to and you received information from seemingly die from a heart attack, but it was too coincidental. Snake is very suspicious about that. Once he talked to them, they died immediately, basically. And he learned that Metal Gear is alive and well and ready to be shooting nukes. We encounter some Greyhound Fox bosses, as well as being introduced to Grey Fox, the really cool cyber ninja person. This next clip is from the showdown with the boss called Raven. I don't know why Metal Gear Solid really likes animal codenames for some reason.
Snakes don't belong in Alaska.
And this fact is absolutely true. In fact, the only reptiles you're going to be seeing in Alaska are sea turtles, and those show up very rarely. Cold-blooded organisms like reptiles and amphibians generally cannot withstand the harsh Alaskan cold. Cold-blooded animals regulate their body temperatures from external temperatures, so there's not a whole lot of heat found in Alaska, even if they hide very deep within the snow. And so naturally, they can't survive in such harsh and extreme conditions. And throughout the game, we're constantly being introduced to Grey Fox, this really cool ninja cyborg character. And just to give you an idea, this is the skill set we're dealing with here.
What? My hand! The deep throat.
So it is you.
You look terrible, Snake.
So what we know from Naomi is that Grey Fox is wearing what they call as an exoskeleton. Can this exoskeleton give us this really cool ninja cyborg slayer of a character, I guess that would depend. I mean, even if assuming this exoskeleton is the one behind the super fast and powerful moveset, we would have to consider the G-force that's being afflicted on Gray Fox's body. Even super trained fighter pilots can withstand a maximum of 9 Gs in G-force, and that's for 2 seconds. Sustained G-force of 6 Gs is enough to kill a regular human being. Now, of course, we are assuming Gray Fox is one of the ultimate soldiers, so we might as well assume that his body can withstand a lot of Gs. It still puts a question of how strenuous is the hard working to keep up with all of this really intense physical movement. Now, it's not completely out of line to think that this technology may actually exist sometime in the near or far future. We're already making very impressive strides in the world of biomedical engineering. Like in this current video with Dr. Eric Guzman's research team, who 3D printed this prosthetic arm using a single muscle sensor. But the real question is, would the government actually want a superhuman to wield a sword in battle? I guess if they're fans of Demon Slayer. We then see this really interesting conversation between Meryl and Snake in the restroom.
So there's something you like about me, huh?
Yeah, you've got a great butt.
Biologically speaking, I think it's confirmed that Snake is indeed a butt man. In this next scene, we're introduced to one of the infamous Foxhound bosses, Psycho Mantis, for those who are unaware of his antics. He actually reads your memory card to kind of tell your fortune or say what kind of person you are, which is pretty funny. And he reads the inputs on your controller. So the best way to beat him is just to use the second port in the PS1 controllers. That's the kind of person we're dealing with here. But he's also known for his telekinesis and his mind reading abilities.
Snake, how do you like me? I want you.
Who's that?
You don't like girls?
Actually, mind control and brainwashing are not completely out of line when it comes to biology. This typically happens with parasites when they infect their host. And what they tend to do is that they disrupt the communication between the central nervous system and the immune system, or they can also affect their host on the protein and genomic levels, as well as directly secreting molecules in the central nervous system to directly alter the host's behavior. One of the most infamously known parasites to do that is T. gondii. It infects rodents and it actually makes them attracted to cat urine, which typically they would definitely keep away from. And they do that so that the mouse actually gets captured by the cat, and then the parasite can just complete its life cycle by reproducing in the gut of the cat. Another parasite called D. dendriticum infects ants, and it actually makes the ants leave the safety of their colonies, and it makes them just stand there at the tip of a grass blade. And what this does, it makes them open to predators, where again the parasite can complete its life cycle, finally reproducing in its ultimate host, which is that predator. So brainwashing? 50-50. I mean, definitely not to the extent that Psycho Mantis does, but who knows? Telekinesis, though, I think that might be a physics question, not so much biology. In this next scene, Naomi and Snake are having a heated conversation through Codec, and the context is that Snake and Meryl encounter Sniper Wolf, and Sniper Wolf kind of shoots at Meryl to lure Snake out. She could have easily killed Meryl, but she decided that she's using Meryl as bait to lure out Snake.
I'm just surprised you're willing to sacrifice yourself. You got the genes of a soldier, not a savior.
So in this scene, it's kind of funny because it's almost as if they're thinking that genetics are like a binary computer code, where if you input a code, you will output a certain action, right? But human nature is so complex. Even though you have the genetics for X trait, it's still a spectrum, and environment really affects where you are on that spectrum, and more importantly, free will. I mean, that has to be one of the most impressive things about human nature in general. The fact that we have free will of our own and how we choose to act and choose to behave. I mean, even genetics cannot predict that. Now we get to the part where Snake and Meryl are caught by Foxhound members, and Snake is being tortured by Ocelot for information. And he overhears a conversation between Liquid Snake and Ocelot himself.
Do you need his DNA too?
Yes. I want a sample while he's still alive. We need it to correct the Genome Soldier's mutations.
Then we'll be able to cure them?
No. We still have to get our hands on Big Boss's DNA.
So for this part, I really think that the developers really needed a reason for why Liquid Snake needed Snake to stay alive, because logically thinking about this, why would they need both the Big Boss's DNA and Snake's DNA if Snake is just a clone of Big Boss, right? What I'm assuming is that they need Snake's DNA in order to sequence it to figure out where in the Genome Soldier's genome the mutations are happening, and if they can use genome therapy to fix it, remove those mutations or correct those mutations. Great. Well, my question is, are these soldiers second or third generation, or are they first generation genome soldiers? Because if they are having all these mutations in their genome, the likelihood of Snake also having those same mutations is extremely high. At the end of the day, if they are all using the same lab methods and they're all using the same DNA, theoretically speaking, if anything, the genome soldiers should be better off with their DNA because they didn't have to go through that experimental phase like Snake is, or Snake was. So this is like a huge question mark on my end. I really think the developers just needed a reason for Snake to stay alive as long as he did. And after Snake's torture scene, he asks Naomi for help with some pain relief.
Snake, I'll increase the level of painkillers in your blood.
Okay.
And my question mark here is that what pain relief drugs is Naomi using? She obviously can't be using anything that you would have to be hooked up to an IV for. Like, for example, your Tylenols or aspirins. You would have to be using a naturally occurring pain reliever, which the only thing I can think of are endorphins. And I guess theoretically speaking, if nanomachines do exist in the blood, she would just have to press a button for the nanomachines to change their conformation, bind to the endorphin receptors, and produce endorphins. But at that point, how much endorphins is really needed for Snake to feel the pain relief? I mean, you'd assume he'd eventually get really high off of those. So nanomachines actually exist as nanoparticles in the world of biology, and they're more so used as a delivery type of system where you can target specific cells that you want to target, such as cancer cells, rather than this cool sci-fi cyborg soldier type of invention. During another call with Snake and Naomi, we learn a little bit more about Snake's predisposed traits in his genome.
It's your genes. They make you predisposed towards violence.
And I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone out here, but yeah, genetics do play a role in aggression and violence for predisposed individuals. So how that would happen is, for example, a gene may be disrupted for a certain enzyme, right? So for example, lower amounts of monoamine oxidase A has been shown to cause neurotransmitters to stay bound longer to the synaptic cleft, and this actually has been shown to increase aggression. Another study showed that lowered levels of neuronal nitric oxide in mice has also been associated with increased aggression. Is it the whole story though? Absolutely not. When it comes to human nature, researchers have found that this typically happens from a learned environment of aggression. So like when a child grows up in a very violent household, he learns that type of behavior and is actually much more likely to also display it as an adult. So it's not the whole story. It's definitely nature versus nurture. Sure, you could be predisposed, but it is a spectrum. And if you grow up in an environment that really teaches you how to regulate your emotions and your aggression, most likely you can grow up to be very normal despite being predisposed to violence. However, we do know Solid Snake was engineered to be a soldier. He was probably raised to be a natural-born soldier. So there's no question on why he would be aggressive. Unless we're talking about cute girls. He seems to have a soft spot for that demographic. Now, Naomi in this Codec call also mentions why she got into genetics in the first place.
Why did you get into genetic research anyway?
I never knew who my parents were, or even what they looked like. I guess I got into genetics because I wanted to figure out why I am the way I am.
So you studied about DNA?
Yeah, I thought if I studied my genetic structure, I'd find out who I really was. I thought that by analyzing a person's genetic information, I could retrieve the blank spots in that person's memory.
Memory is stored in DNA?
We're not sure, but we know that a person's genetic fate is determined just by the sequence of the 4 bases in their DNA.
For this next part, it is a bit complex. Epigenetics have been shown to be involved in memory formation. Epigenetics is just a way to regulate DNA. It's a form of modification done on DNA. So it could be methylation on DNA, which represses DNA, or it could be histone acetylation, which in general activates a gene. Now, can you technically sequence your DNA and figure out all of the epigenetic modifications and try to piece together the puzzle of your life? No, probably not. That doesn't really exist. Memory formation, especially at the cellular level, doesn't really translate to how we perceive memory as whole human beings and how we perceive it in our brains in general. I mean, if you think about it, memory requires the 5 senses, for example, seeing someone, smelling them, hearing their voice, right? But yeah, as of now, there's no real evidence that suggests sequencing and reading your DNA and all the modifications can piece any puzzle together for you. I guess unfortunately for Naomi, she had to learn that the hard way. I wonder if she regrets her PhD though. And Snake finally escapes the prison he'd been kept in, and he meets up with Otacon for an interesting discussion. Also, Otacon has this sneaking suit that he wears, just in case you guys are wondering how on earth he's been able to survive such craziness that's going on in Alaska, because he would not survive. But that's why. He's just been sneaking around.
Do you think love can bloom, even on a battlefield?
So unfortunately for Snake, what he's describing is actually something called trauma bonding. Basically, when two people go through a very high stress or traumatic experience together, they think it's love, but really it's just a way for humans to bond and lessen the stress on each other. And we'll actually start seeing how things pan out between him and Meryl in Metal Gear Solid 4. But that's for a separate video. What's really interesting is that some studies show in certain stressful environments, oxytocin is released, and that's what we commonly refer to as the love hormone. Maybe that has something to do with feeling like love can bloom in the battlefield. Typically, when you're out of that stressful situation and you go back to real life, I mean, that's when the true test of love comes in. I don't know, maybe if Snake takes Meryl to a coffee date, then they can actually see if they're in love with each other. Moving on, once we kill Sniper Wolf and Raven, we find out that Naomi Hunter that we've been talking to is actually not the real Naomi Hunter. The Naomi Hunter we're talking to stole the identity of the real Naomi Hunter. And we actually figure out that she was doing all of this in order to get revenge on Snake. Why, you may ask? Well, Grey Wolf was her foster brother in a way. He took care of her when she was an orphan. And he supposedly died in Zanzibar. However, when he did die in Zanzibar, the government apparently took his body and did some testing. And now he lives as a brain-dead soldier in an exoskeleton. And that's partially why he'd been acting so weird when he was fighting with Snake. And so Naomi Hunter was really angry that Snake killed him, because Snake is the one that killed him, of course. So she injected him with a virus called FoxDie.
FoxDie is a type of retrovirus that targets and kills only specific people. First, it infects the macrophages in the victim's body. FoxDie contains smart enzymes created through protein engineering. They're programmed to respond to specific genetic patterns in the cells.
Those enzymes recognize the target's DNA?
Right. They respond by becoming active and using the macrophages. They begin creating TNF epsilon.
Huh?
It's a type of cytokine, a peptide which causes cells to die. The TNF epsilon is carried along the bloodstream to the heart, where they attach to the TNF receptors in the heart cells.
So the entirety of this information is completely sci-fi. The only way a virus can specifically target an individual that is unique is by targeting their microsatellite DNA or their short tandem repeats. And doing that, I mean, I can't think of a mechanism where binding to that segment of DNA, which is the cellular fingerprint, if you will, of every individual, there's no mechanism for that to work out. Also, microsatellites are unique to everyone except for identical twins. So there's a big question mark on that, right? Because we'll soon find out the relationship between liquid snake and solid snake to be twins. Surprise! But more information later, because there's a huge issue with that narrative. Another major sci-fi pseudoscience is the fact that she mentioned TNF epsilon. That doesn't really exist at all in our bodies. There's not a receptor for it. There's something called TNF alpha, and yeah, it does induce apoptosis in cells, but it's not specific to the heart. It's actually found on pretty much all of our nucleated cells in our bodies. But on a lighter note, it's a good thing this type of technology can't exist. I guess if there's a real life snake out there, he'd just have to rely on good old fashioned cyanide. And we finally get to Liquid Snake's therapy session between him and his brother. He reveals who he is to Snake, and he also reveals that Snake was injected with FoxDie so that he can transmit it to the two hostages, which is why they died, and also the Foxhound members.
Could be. In any case, if it doesn't kill you, then I'm not worried either. After all, our genetic code is identical.
So it's true. You and I are...
Yes, twins. You're fine. You got all the old man's dominant genes. I got the flawed recessive genes.
And we finally get to the most awaited part of the video, in my opinion, the major issue, the major inaccuracy in this entire thing that a large portion of the narrative depends on, by the way. So Liquid Snake claims that him and Solid Snake are identical twins. The reason I cannot assume they're fraternal twins is because Liquid Snake specifically said that they share the same genetic code, and he even said that if Snake didn't die from FoxDie, Liquid Snake isn't gonna die from FoxDie because they share the same genetic code. Well, what's the issue? The issue is Liquid later states that Snake has all of the dominant traits from Big Boss, and Liquid has all of the recessive traits from Big Boss. Why is that an issue? Because then you're not identical twins. In this case, you are fraternal twins. At the very least, you can tell that because they don't look identical at all. Even if they share the same gene source, I guess they could technically be fraternal twins at that point, but they are not identical twins. In order for Snake to have the dominant alleles, he would have to express the dominant alleles, right? And in order for Liquid to express the recessive alleles, he cannot have any dominant alleles within his genome. Otherwise, he would just express the dominant alleles. That's literally the meaning of recessive genes, by the way. It doesn't necessarily mean you have the worst genes, which is what Liquid is kind of hinting at here. No, all it means is that recessive genes just means that you need two recessive alleles in order to express them. If you have a dominant allele and a recessive allele, you cannot express the recessive gene. Hence, they are not actually identical twins. And that's the big issue. It's like the basis of Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 1 specifically, and it's always mentioned as if it's some sort of big reveal, but no, they are not identical at all. But that literally is my biggest issue with this entire game. How can someone overlook this? If you actually had like a biology team look at this, I promise you, this is such rudimentary information. You cannot be purely identical and have different alleles. Literally identical means identical, same genetic code. You would look the same. That's it. I don't even think you need a biologist to tell you that. You could just look at them. Unless it got lost in translation, but I don't think so, because there are later bits in this video that I'll show that pretty much say that Liquid is saying they are identical. And we are finally getting to the end of the game and the end of the video. Here we see Gray Fox again. I don't know how, but he's back from the dead, but he's a cool anime cyborg, so I'm not gonna question it. He saves us from Metal Gear and weakens it one last time before sacrificing himself. And we have our final show off with Liquid Snake. Oh, and we gotta save Meryl, I guess.
My father was wounded in combat and already in a coma when they brought him in. So they created us from his cells. They fertilized an egg with one of father's cells, and then let it divide into 8 clone babies. Then they transferred the clones to someone's uterus.
So for this bit, I wonder if the developers didn't necessarily understand what the biologist team were trying to tell them. But if you do what Liquid is saying and take a full 46 chromosome cell, somatic cell from the father and insert it into an egg to fertilize, you would end up with 69 chromosomes. That is not a viable cell. I think what they actually tried to say is that they went with somatic cell cloning. And what that is that you take a somatic cell that has all 46 chromosomes and you fertilize a mature oocyte or a mature egg that's been enucleated. So you remove the nucleus from that egg. So what you get is a fertilized egg with 46 chromosomes, but it's 100% a clone of the donor cell.
So it was you and I, 2 fertilized eggs with exactly the same DNA.
And this next part, again, Liquid is saying he's a full clone, a twin brother of Snake, and that's just not true. We know that. Again, with the whole dominant recessive alleles. If you have all of the recessive genes, you absolutely cannot be a clone of Snake who has all of the dominant alleles.
Heard of the asymmetry theory? Nature tends to favor asymmetry. Those species which have gone extinct all show signs of symmetry.
So to address this part of his argument, I want you to go on Tinder right now and I want you to go swiping. And I want you to ask yourself, are you swiping on the most symmetrical faces or the asymmetrical faces? Yeah, that's what I thought. Symmetry is the one that's more prevalent in biology and in nature, not asymmetry, unless what Liquid was referring to due to a bad translation, or maybe the developers didn't really understand what the biologists were coming from. But if he means genetic diversity, then yes, genetically diverse beings have a higher probability for survival than beings that are with low genetic diversity. We typically see that with people who only mate within their tribes or their towns, and then we start seeing an accumulation of mutations or diseases. Now, why does that happen? That is because, let's say in a tribe, 2 people have a certain mutation that causes a disease, right? Well, if those 2 people mate and stay within the same tribe, and that tribe just mates with each other, what happens is that that recessive allele for the disease becomes more prevalent in the population. And so eventually what you'll see is that more and more people will start having babies where that disease that was supposed to be recessive starts becoming expressed. Because Mendelian genetics, if we have a carrier father and a carrier mother, you have a 25% chance that your baby is gonna be expressing that recessive disease. And so with diversity, what happens is that the chance that that disease either gets passed on or expressed becomes lower, just because not a whole lot of people are carrying that same recessive allele for that gene. I'm not sure if that's what Liquid meant by asymmetry and symmetry, but it makes more sense with diversity versus non-diversity. But all this to say, clones don't really need to worry about that unless they are passing their seed, which I don't know. I thought Snake was the same with the Genome soldiers. I didn't think they were having babies.
In nature, family members don't mate with each other, and yet they help each other to survive. Do you know why? It increases the chance that their genes will be passed on to a new generation. Altruism among blood relatives is a response to natural selection. It's called the selfish gene theory.
You're telling me that your genes are ordering you to save the Genome soldiers?
You can't fight your genes. It's fate. All living things are born for the sole purpose of passing on their parents' genes. That's why I'll follow what my genes tell me. And then I'm going to go beyond. in order to break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you.
Liquid has to be the most confusing character out here because the selfish gene theory pretty much says everything exists so that you can preserve your genes, and that your genes are the ones that matter most in a living being, and as long as they get passed on, your genes are going to try their best to do everything they can to pass on your genes, right? So let me get this straight. Liquid needs to kill his twin brother, who supposedly has the same genes, except his twin brother has the superior genes, the dominant ones in which the genome soldiers are all based off of. He needs to kill him in order to abide by the selfish gene theory, even though he has the recessive genes that nobody used to create the genome soldiers, and he technically cannot fix all the mutations that are accumulating within the genome soldiers. But he has to kill Snake. I just think he's holding grudges at this point, really. You don't have to give all this long-winded talk that makes no sense, Liquid. It's okay to just say, I'm jealous of you, brother. And that's why you gotta die. So finally, with all this mess that was happening and going around, Liquid eventually dies from FoxDie. Shocker. Otacon is alive and well, and Meryl and Snake ride off into the sunset together, where we get this beautiful masterpiece of an ending.
I think it's time we look for a new path in life.
A new path?
A new purpose.
Will we find it?
We'll find it. I know we'll find it.
What are those?
Caribou. To the Aleutians, the caribou is a symbol of life. It'll be spring here soon.
For us too.
Yeah. Spring brings new life to everything. It's a time for hope. I've lived here a long time, but Alaska has never looked more beautiful. The sky, the sea, the caribou, and most of all, you. Come on. Let's enjoy life.
I really don't think Kojima thought that this game was going to be so popular back in the early 2000s, because oh boy, are we in for a treat with Metal Gear Solid 4 and how things pan out that way. I'm gonna go ahead and spoil some of the romance for you. Snake and Meryl don't end up together. In fact, when you play Metal Gear Solid 4, you hardly know they were lovers in the beginning. It's because they act like strangers or like soldiers. Like, they don't share anything intimate like we see them with this game. Now, this further supports the idea of trauma bonding. I think they fell in love in the battlefield because of survival circumstances, not really falling in love. It's just that they were surviving together and feelings were heightened, and maybe some oxytocin was released. But for me personally, it is so odd seeing this ending and seeing how emotional and sweet Snake is to Meryl, because we never see that side of him ever again in the franchise, I don't think. And I'm not talking about Big Boss. Even Big Boss wasn't really a huge romance guy, right? But this heartfelt, sweet, romantic Snake, I've never seen that side of him before this ending. But I'm really, really glad there was such a long time between the production of Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 4. I don't think I'd ever be able to get over the emotional wreck that Metal Gear Solid 4 has you in for, right after seeing the super hopeful, happy, bright ending that Metal Gear Solid 1 has for Snake and Meryl. I don't know, maybe I should have just stopped playing Metal Gear Solid right at Peace Walker and just hope for the best. But that is it, you guys. That has been the video. If you like this video, please leave a like. Tell me in the comments down below what else you want to see, and I'll see you in the next time.